Welcome back to Talk the Walk with me, Sarah Wong. I'm with British MP Chris Skidmore, Director of Policy at Public Policy Project. Thank you very much, Mr. Skidmore, for joining us. Climate change is obviously the top of many policymakers' mind. And when we talk about mitigate the damage from global warming, we have to orientate our policy towards reducing carbon dioxide emissions. But while doing that, another concerns obviously arise, that is energy security and energy transition. And I think this is just, the recent phenomena that was happening in the United States, for example, and in Europe and in Britain has prompted many people to think how to mitigate the financial impact incurred in energy transition so that the ordinary people, especially those in the developing countries, won't bear the brunt of rising living costs and energy shortage in that regard.
Yes, so we've had a bit of an energy crunch, if you could call it that, recently. We obviously have, I think, up to about 40% of our power supply now in the United Kingdom is supplied by wind. We have one of the largest offshore wind farms in the North Sea near Britain. But we have obviously seen elsewhere, when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, that sort of intermittent power causes real problems for constancy of supply that is needed for the electricity grid, not just domestically, but obviously for heavy industry as well. And so energy security is definitely rising up the agenda, and we've seen that with the Nord Stream power sort of gas supply line, which Russia supplies into Europe. And so we do need to, I think, diversify our power. I mean, this is about, I think, placing bets effectively on making sure that you have the broadest, most diverse power supply, that you're not dependent on particular countries like Russia or Norway for their gas, but you're also not dependent on one particular renewable technology. And so I would support the diversification of new clean energy supplies by looking at nuclear, and particularly new nuclear. We've got small modular nuclear reactors that are now being built in 50 countries across the world. And you have also the opportunity for hydrogen if we can sort of unlock the regulation and the standards that are needed to trade globally in hydrogen. It's not there at the moment. But if we can recognize that we can produce hydrogen both from obviously fossil fuels processes, but also electrolysis and using nuclear power to provide the energy and the heat to electrolyze water into hydrogen. I think that's something that we need to act now in order to make sure that we have those different energy sources available.
How big is which factor is bigger in resulting in the energy crunch in Europe, in Britain? As you say, the lack of diversity of energy sources, or is the geopolitics and supply chains disruption that was caused by the global pandemic?
So I think one of the problems in the United Kingdom was that we had reduced our storage capacity. Actually, when you ever came to the United Kingdom, there used to be these Victorian gas storing sort of units that would go up and down, and they were past their sell-by date effectively. So the United Kingdom phased out its gas storage. So we were down to about 4% of our supply being in storage, and that was sort of half of what other countries in Europe had. So that was a real problem with on the infrastructure level, that we were dependent upon a constant supply of gas and not having that ability to. I think it was about sort of 3 days worth of gas supply that we had in storage. And so once that ran out, if the gas supply ran out, we were in difficulties. We also, I think, have an additional problem coming down the tracks that we are now trying to solve. And I spoke in Parliament this week, just gone, because we were introducing a new bill to try and finance nuclear power. Because we have a real problem also that we have 13 nuclear reactors in this country, in the United Kingdom. of which half of them will be shut by 2025, and only one will be operating by 2030 because they've reached the end of their natural life also. You need to take the difficult decisions now, because 28 years is not a long time. It's a long time in politics, but actually in terms of energy, that's not a long time to put that infrastructure in place. And so, I think we are paying the price of failures to take action in decades past. And I worry that, future generations will pay the price if we don't take action now.
Now, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, he's a big supporter of developing hydrogen power in his country because Australia relies still heavily on coal. And along with nuclear, hydrogen, are these technologies developed and mature enough to meet the task?
So I think that what we need to recognize is that there is a huge synergy between nuclear and hydrogen. That nuclear can provide power by itself, but nuclear that can provide heat actually really improves the electrolysis process for hydrogen. We've made these discoveries now that mean that it can make hydrogen a lot cheaper. And I think that's the thing about nuclear and hydrogen that they share in common. Their price per kilowatt hour is still too high to make it commercially viable. So we need to reach a tipping point. You have something called the learning curve that slopes downwards. The more you deploy the technologies, the more the cost comes down. We've seen that hugely with solar in the past 20 years, and we've seen it with wind power and also now batteries. But the problem is that we need to get that upfront commitment to invest in nuclear. And the existing fusion reactors are big projects. Smaller reactors that are coming online will be cheaper, and the more that we can invest in those now, that makes nuclear power more of a reality. And also with hydrogen, making sure that I think we need to redefine our definition of green hydrogen, because at the moment we have blue hydrogen, pink hydrogen from nuclear, grey hydrogen from fossil fuels. It's a strange rainbow-coloured taxonomy. And what we really need to do is redefine a global standard for hydrogen that is reflecting on its carbon content. And then with that, we should look to scale the price so that actually we make it incentive driven, so that the greener the hydrogen, the cheaper the price, and we need to get it down ultimately to a realistic level. But Chile, for instance, who thinks they can produce green hydrogen at massive scale because they have the capability of producing 70 times the amount of energy that they actually need domestically, so they're looking to become a net energy exporter. They're hoping to get it down to $1 a kilogram eventually, and and if you hit that sort of, you're more than within a commercial price range.
On that note, how will investment into new renewable energy and hydrogen nuclear power affect the prices of fossil fuel energy, natural gas, oil? How would that play out?
So I think there is going to be eventually a tipping point. We have seen the price of oil and gas rise, and eventually, we have seen commitments from some of those petroleum-based states in the Gulf that they will begin to phase out sort of the use of oil. And so once that supply dries down, begins to dry up or be reduced, then obviously its price will continue to rise. That creates that tipping point. Whether it's a transition which we need to make sure that it's wind, solar, nuclear and hydrogen, but the key point here is that you can't put a price on security of energy. And so that's why, in order that you've got a constant baseload supply of energy, you do need to make sure nuclear is there. If we want to look at the really key important thing to remember is that 70% of carbon emissions are outside of the electricity grid. So actually, we need liquid fuels. It's shipping, it's aviation, it's what is called the hard to abate sectors. And so that's where liquid hydrogen has a really important role to play, where electricity can't make a difference.
Interesting. Now, for countries that don't want to suffer the economic pain, some of them, the wealthy ones, may opt to pay for their carbon emissions and thus give rise to the concept of carbon market. And with the introduction of hydrogen power, for example, there could be a hydrogen market as well. Like these kind of markets in the future, how does it work, and what kind of mechanism should be set up to ensure its efficiency, effectiveness, and its safety?
Well, firstly, and I'm not sure whether Glasgow is going to solve this problem, but it is definitely a problem that needs to be solved, is resolving and agreeing on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which would facilitate then the establishment of international partnerships and agreements. And until that's signed, really, I don't think you're going to have the effective ability to have a global carbon price or a global hydrogen price, because you're going to have a variety of markets. And, that's fine. We can have trading taking place on the NASDAQ or the FTSE or elsewhere commercially. And I'm sure private companies are moving faster than governments on this. But ideally, we would have, a universal trading mechanism in the same way that the dollar or the yen is traded. And to be able to achieve that, we need a universal commitment. I would say there is a distinction to be made around trading carbon, which would potentially be advantageous for those low carbon producing countries and also those emerging economies that can then benefit from their economies being, producing low carbon from the outset. So actually investment being driven inwards as a result of making those commitments to low carbon emerging economies. But at the same time, we've got to get away from any sort of dependence on carbon offsetting, which I don't think will be sustainable in the longer term. Commitments can be made now to reducing carbon emissions, but those reductions are, dependent on land use that is often being sold several times over. And so I think it's important that when we look at trading emissions and that framework, that we begin to make a commitment also that we are not dependent on offsetting.
Interesting. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much, Mr. Skidmore, for sharing your insight and your wisdom with us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.